On Halloween night 1980, a teenage girl walked up to a truck driver at a gas station in Huntsville, Texas, and asked for a ride to the prison. She said she had a friend there. The next morning, her battered body was found dumped on a remote road. She had no name, no identity, and her killer vanished. For 41 years, she was known only as Jane Doe. Then, in 2021, a single strand of DNA gave her back her name, Sherri Jarvis. She was just 14 years old. Before we go further into this story, please consider subscribing to Cold Case Whisperer. It's much appreciated, and it helps us keep bringing you real cold case stories like this one. Sherri Ann Jarvis was born in 1966 in the state of Minnesota, in the quiet suburban community of Forest Lake, just north of the Twin Cities. By all accounts, her childhood was marked by turbulence and instability from a very early age. Those who knew the family have described a home life fractured by divorce, frequent moves, and a lack of the steady, nurturing presence that every child needs to feel safe. Sherri struggled in school, not because she lacked intelligence, but because the chaos of her personal life left little room for homework or the simple routines that other children took for granted. She was described as a bright-eyed girl who could light up a room with her smile. Yet behind that smile was a profound longing for acceptance and belonging. By the time she reached her early teens, she had already begun to act out, seeking attention and affection in places where it was rarely offered in a healthy way. She ran away from home for the first time when she was barely 13, a pattern that would repeat itself with heartbreaking regularity. The authorities in Minnesota became familiar with her name. Sherri was in and out of the juvenile system, a system ill-equipped to handle the deep emotional wounds that drove her behavior. Rather than seeing a child in pain, the machinery of the state often saw a problem to be managed. In the summer of 1980, at the age of 14, Sherri's life took a turn that would sever her forever from the familiar landscape of Minnesota. She was sent, by arrangement of family and social services, to live with relatives in Texas. The exact circumstances of this relocation are murky, clouded by decades of faded records and fragmented memories. But what is known is that Sherri did not stay with those relatives for long. Her pattern of running away resumed almost immediately in a state far from home, where she had no friends, no support network, and no one to watch over her. She was soon picked up by law enforcement as a runaway and placed in a juvenile detention facility in the Houston area, in Harris County. It was from a court hearing related to her status as a runaway and a child in need of supervision that Sherri Jarvis made her final escape. Sometime in August of 1980, she simply walked away from the courthouse or the facility where the hearing was being held. No one stopped her. No alarm was raised loudly enough to bring her back. She vanished into the sprawling, sun-bleached landscape of southeast Texas, a 14-year-old girl alone, with no money, no transportation, and no plan beyond the desperate urge to be free. Her family in Minnesota reported her missing, but in an era before instant communication and national databases for missing children, the report sat in a file while a girl matching her description moved through the underbelly of Texas, surviving in ways that a child should never have to survive. For the next 2 months, Sherri Jarvis was a ghost. No confirmed sightings placed her anywhere until the very last day of her life. The investigation would later piece together fragments, suggesting she may have been hitchhiking, staying with strangers, and drifting northward toward Huntsville, a small city about 70 miles north of Houston, known primarily for its sprawling state prison units. It is a grim irony that a child so desperate for freedom was drawn inexorably toward a landscape defined by incarceration. On October 31st, 1980, Halloween, the town of Huntsville was decorated with the trappings of the season, but the horror about to unfold was all too real. That afternoon and early evening, Multiple witnesses at a truck stop and gas station along Interstate 45 saw a teenage girl who matched Sherri's description. She was trying to get a ride. A waitress at the nearby Hitchin Post truck stop later recalled the girl coming in and asking for directions to the Ellis unit, a large state prison on the outskirts of town. The girl said she had a friend there, someone she needed to see. The waitress, concerned by her young age and her disheveled appearance, tried to help her, but the girl left. A short time later, a truck driver encountered the same girl at a gas station. She asked him for a ride to the prison. He agreed, and she climbed into the cab of his truck. As they drove, she told him she was from the Houston area, which aligned with her known flight from Harris County, and she spoke of a friend at the Ellis unit. The truck driver dropped her off at the entrance road to the prison, near the gate, around 6:30 in the evening. He watched as she walked toward the facility, a slight figure disappearing into the twilight. That was the last confirmed sighting of Sherri Jarvis alive. What happened between that moment at the prison gate and the following morning remains a dark void, a sequence of events known only to her killer. The Ellis unit records showed no sign that Sherri ever made it inside. Guards did not recall a young girl coming to visit an inmate. The friend she mentioned has never been identified, and it is entirely possible that she fabricated the story as a way to gain sympathy or simply as a direction to point to, a destination in a life that had become directionless. The most chilling possibility is that someone intercepted her near the prison, a predator who saw a vulnerable child alone on a desolate road and struck. Early on the morning of November 1st, 1980, a passing motorist on a rural farm road just outside Huntsville saw something lying in the brush near the tree line. It was the body of a young girl. She had been dumped callously, left exposed to the elements as if she were nothing more than refuse. The Walker County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene, and what the deputies found would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The victim was a white female, estimated to be between 14 and 19 years old, with brown hair and brown eyes. She was nude, and her body bore the unmistakable signs of a brutal, savage attack. The autopsy, conducted at the Harris County Medical Examiner's office, revealed that she had been viciously beaten, sexually assaulted, and ultimately strangled to death. Ligature marks around her neck indicated a garrote or a cord had been used with such force that it crushed the delicate structures of her throat. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms, evidence that she had fought desperately for her life against her attacker. She was not killed at the spot where she was found. Her body had been transported there and discarded. The investigators scoured the area for any scrap of evidence. They found tire tracks, but they led nowhere. They found a few pieces of clothing scattered nearby, but they could not definitively link them to the body. The girl had no identification, no purse, no belongings of any kind. She was a complete unknown. She became known as the Walker County Jane Doe, or simply the Huntsville Jane Doe. In the days and weeks that followed, every available lead was pursued. Detectives contacted every prison unit in the region, hoping to find the inmate she claimed to know. Inmate photographs were shown to witnesses from the truck stop, but no one could make a match. The prison angle consumed vast resources, but yielded nothing. Meanwhile, the girl's body remained unclaimed at the morgue. Her fingerprints were taken and sent to state and national repositories. Nothing came back. No missing person report matched her description perfectly. The report filed by Sherri's mother in Minnesota languished in a different system, separated by jurisdictional boundaries and a lack of communication that would today be unthinkable. Sherri Jarvis was out there, listed as a missing child, and her body was here, listed as an unidentified murder victim, and the two files simply did not connect. It was a catastrophic failure of information sharing that would condemn her to 4 decades of anonymity. She was buried in a pauper's grave in the Oakwood Cemetery in Huntsville, beneath a small flat marker that read only, "Unknown white female, November 1st, 1980. No name, no age, no home. Just the cold fact of her death and the date her body was found." The investigation did not close, but it stalled. Over the years, detectives revisited the case file, hoping that new technology or a fresh pair of eyes might crack the mystery. In the early 2000s, her body was exhumed for the first time. The goal was to extract DNA, a relatively new tool in forensic investigations. The exhumation was conducted with great care, and a full anthropological examination was performed. Her remains provided a DNA profile, which was entered into the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and crime scenes. The hope was palpable. If her killer had been convicted of another crime and his DNA was in the system, a match would light up like a flare in the dark. But no match ever came. Her killer was not in the database. The DNA also generated a more accurate forensic reconstruction of her face, a bust created by a forensic artist that showed a pretty young girl with high cheekbones, a rounded chin, and thick, wavy hair. That image was circulated widely, posted on websites dedicated to the unidentified, and shown on true crime television programs. Tips trickled in, but none led to her name. One woman from Minnesota saw the reconstruction and thought it resembled a girl she had known in school, a girl named Sherri. But by the time that tip was investigated, the connection was not firmly made. The years rolled on. The detectives who first walked the crime scene retired. New investigators inherited the case, each one picking up the torch with a vow to give this child her name back. They checked missing person databases, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where Sherri's information had, by then, finally been entered. Yet still, the dots were not connected. The missing girl from Minnesota, who had run away from a Texas courthouse, and the unidentified body, found 2 months later, just up the road, remained separate entities in a labyrinth of data. The turning point came with the advent of forensic genetic genealogy, a revolutionary technique that had cracked some of the most notorious cold cases in American history, including the Golden State Killer case. This method involves uploading a crime scene DNA profile to public genealogy databases, where distant relatives may have submitted their own DNA for family history research. Instead of looking for an exact match to an offender, investigators look for partial matches that reveal a family tree. Genealogists then build that tree backward and forward, identifying potential candidates until the victim or suspect is found. In 2020, the Walker County Sheriff's Office, in partnership with the Texas Attorney General's Office, made the decision to submit the DNA of the Huntsville Jane Doe to Othram, a private forensic laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas, that specializes in advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy. Othram scientists were able to extract a much more robust DNA profile from the degraded remains, using technology that had not existed when she was first exhumed. They built a comprehensive genetic profile and uploaded it to the databases that allow law enforcement searches. Within months, a cluster of distant cousins began to emerge, all pointing back to a family tree rooted in Minnesota. The genealogists worked meticulously, tracing lineages through vital records, obituaries, and public documents. The research narrowed to a specific branch of the family, a couple who had a daughter named Sherri Ann Jarvis. Sherri had been born in 1966 and had disappeared in 1980. She had been 14 years old, which aligned perfectly with the estimated age of the remains. All that was left was to confirm the match. Investigators made contact with Sherri's mother, who was still alive and still carrying the weight of more than 40 years of not knowing. She provided a DNA sample, and the comparison was absolute. On November 9, 2021, the Walker County Sheriff's Office held a press conference and announced to the world that the Huntsville Jane Doe was, at long last, Sherri Ann Jarvis. The announcement was delivered with solemn professionalism, but behind the microphone, the weight of the moment was immense. A child who had been discarded, like trash, had reclaimed her name. The public learned the broad strokes of her story: her troubled home life, her repeated flights from the system, her final tragic journey from a Houston courthouse to a lonely death in Huntsville. But the announcement also came with a stark and sobering reality. While Sherri Jarvis had been identified, her killer remained completely unknown. The forensic genetic genealogy that had given Sherri her name did not point to a suspect in her murder. The DNA recovered from the crime scene had been hers, not the killer's. Or perhaps the killer's DNA was present but so degraded or mixed that it could not be isolated and used for a genealogical search. The method is a powerful tool, but it is not magic, and in this case, it brought a victim out of the shadows, but left a perpetrator in the dark. This is a critical moment in our story, the moment when science gave a voice back to a girl silenced for over 4 decades. If you're finding this case as compelling as we do, and you want to support the ongoing work of bringing names to the nameless and justice to the forgotten, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Your subscription helps ensure that stories like Sherri's are told and that her face remains in the public eye, because somewhere out there, someone knows what happened on that Halloween night, and it is never too late for the truth to surface. With her identity now known, investigators pivoted to reconstructing her final months with a new intensity. The timeline from August, when she fled the juvenile hearing in Harris County, to October 31st, when she appeared at the truck stop in Huntsville, was a blank that needed to be filled. Detectives interviewed people who had been in the Houston area in 1980, including former inmates, truck drivers, and residents of the neighborhoods near the courthouse. The theory that Sherri was attempting to visit an inmate at the Ellis unit regained prominence. Who was this inmate, and why would a 14-year-old girl from Minnesota, who had only been in Texas a short time, go to such lengths to see him? One possibility is that she had met someone during her 2 months on the run who had been incarcerated, perhaps an older individual who had offered her protection or affection, unhealthy as it may have been. Another is that the friend was a complete fabrication, a story she told to gain rides and sympathy. Yet witnesses were consistent. She specifically named the Ellis unit, a detail that suggests some prior knowledge. Investigators combed through prison records from 1980, looking for inmates who might have had a connection to a young girl from out of state. The sheer volume of data, much of it archived in paper form and never digitized, made this a Herculean task. No single name emerged as the definitive link. The challenge is compounded by the fact that Sherri's route on that final evening took her to the prison gate, but she never entered. This means that if she was meeting someone, that meeting was likely to occur outside the walls, a clandestine rendezvous that would have been against prison rules. If a guard or another inmate had been involved in facilitating such a meeting, it would have been covered up, or perhaps she simply stood at the gate, lost and confused, and was seen by someone who followed her when she walked away. The truck driver who gave her the ride was thoroughly investigated. He cooperated fully and passed a polygraph examination. His description of dropping her at the entrance road and watching her walk toward the facility was corroborated by the timeline and by other witnesses who saw her near the prison. He was ruled out as a suspect. The waitress who served her at the truck stop also gave detailed statements and was never considered a person of interest. The killer, it seemed, had come upon her after she left the vicinity of the prison, somewhere on the dark, rural roads that crisscross Walker County. The attack itself was one of extreme violence, indicative of a crime of rage or an attempt to utterly dominate and destroy the victim. The beating she endured was so severe that forensic pathologists noted fractures, to her facial bones and ribs. The sexual assault was savage, and the strangulation, which was the cause of death, was performed with a ligature tightened with such force that it left deep, grooved abrasions. This was not a crime of impulse alone. It was a sustained and brutal act. The person who committed it had either brought the ligature, suggesting premeditation, or used an item readily available. But in either case, the duration and intensity of the assault pointed to an offender with capacity for extreme cruelty. The profile of such an offender, constructed by behavioral analysts over the years, suggests someone with a history of violence against women, likely someone who knew the area well, someone comfortable with the isolated back roads and the proximity to the prison. This person would have been familiar with the rhythms of the truck stops and the comings and goings of drifters and hitchhikers. He may have had a job that allowed him to move freely at odd hours. He was likely older than Sherri, physically stronger, and someone who could offer a ride or a promise of help without raising immediate alarm. Since the identification in 2021, the case has remained open and active. The Walker County Sheriff's Office continues to follow leads generated by the renewed publicity. Every tip is investigated, no matter how small. The fact that Sherri's DNA was successfully profiled from her remains means that the same technology could, if a suspect is ever identified and his DNA compared, definitively link him to the crime if his genetic material was left behind. The challenge, of course, is that most of the physical evidence from 1980 has been handled under the less rigorous standards of the time, and degradation is a constant enemy. Yet, forensic science advances with every passing year. Items of evidence, including the ligature if it was ever recovered and saved, and any trace evidence found on her body, could be retested using modern techniques that might detect the killer's DNA. The plea from law enforcement is that someone out there knows the man who murdered Sherri Jarvis. He may have told someone, a spouse, a friend, a cellmate. He may have bragged or confessed in a moment of guilt or under the influence of alcohol or drugs. He may be dead now, his secrets buried with him, but if he is alive, he is likely in his 60s or 70s. Time has changed his appearance, but the darkness inside him remains. The hope is that someone will search their memory, confront a lingering suspicion about a relative or an acquaintance from 1980 in the Huntsville area, and come forward. The reward for information leading to an arrest has been increased, and the case has been featured on Crime Stoppers programs across Texas and nationally. The story of Sherri Jarvis is a testament to the perseverance of those who refused to let her be forgotten. It is also a grim reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by children who fall through the cracks of our social systems. Sherri was let down by nearly every institution that was supposed to protect her. Her family, due to circumstances that were no doubt complex and painful for all involved, the juvenile justice system that could not hold her safely, the system that did not connect her missing person report with her unidentified remains for over 4 decades. She drifted through the last months of her life as a leaf on the wind, completely invisible to those who might have saved her. And yet in death, she has been surrounded by a community of advocates. The forensic scientists who worked for years to extract her DNA, the genealogists who spent thousands of hours building her family tree, the detectives who carried her case file from decade to decade. All of them became the family that Sherri lacked in life. They gave her back the dignity of her name, and they placed a photograph of a smiling 14-year-old girl next to the haunting clay reconstruction that had once been her only face. That photograph, recovered from family archives, shows a girl with hope in her eyes, a girl who had not yet been worn down by the world's cruelties. The gap between that photograph and the desecrated body left on a rural road is the story of Sherri Jarvis. It is a story of profound loss, not just of a life, but of all the potential that life held. Sherri never got to go to her high school prom. She never got to learn to drive, to fall in love in a healthy way, to find a career, to have children, to make amends with her mother. All of those possibilities were taken from her on a cold November morning by a person who saw her not as a human being, but as a target. As the investigation continues, the memory of Sherri Jarvis serves a purpose beyond this single case. She stands as a symbol of the thousands of unidentified remains that lie in graves across this country, waiting for their names. Every year, thanks to genetic genealogy, more of them are identified, and more families receive the painful but necessary gift of certainty. For Sherri's mother, the news in 2021 was a lightning strike of grief and relief. She finally knew where her daughter was. She could visit a grave and place flowers on a marker that now bears a name. The sheriff's office, in a gesture of respect, replaced the old anonymous stone with a proper headstone inscribed with Sherri Ann Jarvis. The unknown was made known, and the mourning could begin in earnest. The final chapter of this story remains unwritten. It will be written only when her killer is brought to justice, or when it is determined beyond all doubt that he has taken his secrets to the grave. Until then, the case remains a cold case with a warm pulse, a mystery that refuses to die because a little girl from Forest Lake, Minnesota, deserves to have her story told in full. She came to Texas seeking something, perhaps freedom, perhaps love, perhaps just a place to belong. She found instead a predator waiting in the shadows. We owe her the truth. We owe her justice. And so the quiet work continues, the sifting of evidence, the running of DNA profiles, the knocking on doors, all of it in the service of a 14-year-old girl who, on a Halloween night long ago, looked up at a stranger and asked for a ride to a prison, not knowing that she was already entering the darkest and most final confinement of all. Her name was Sherri Jarvis. She is not forgotten. Since that November day in 2021, when her name was restored to her, the landscape of grief around Sherri Jarvis has shifted in ways both profound and painful. The city of Huntsville, long accustomed to the uncomfortable weight of an unsolved child murder buried in its conscience, suddenly had to reckon with the reality that the girl in the pauper's grave had a mother, a family, a story that did not begin on a cold slab in a morgue, but in a living room in Forest Lake, Minnesota. The immediate aftermath of the identification brought a flood of emotion. Sherri's mother, now elderly and still living in Minnesota, spoke briefly through law enforcement, expressing her gratitude for the tireless work that had finally located her daughter, but also the devastating finality of knowing that her child's life had ended in such brutality. For 41 years, she had held onto a sliver of hope that Sherri might walk through the door, perhaps as a grown woman with a different name, having left her past behind. That hope was now extinguished, replaced by a sorrow that had no remedy, only the small mercy of a marked grave to visit. In Huntsville, the community responded with an outpouring of sympathy. Local residents who had grown up with the legend of the Walker County Jane Doe, who had passed the Oakwood Cemetery and seen the flat stone with its haunting anonymity, now placed flowers and stuffed animals on a grave that finally bore the name Sherri Ann Jarvis. The simple marker that had been placed by the county in the early 1980s was removed and replaced with the proper headstone, funded in part by donations from people who had never known Sherri, but who felt a deep, abiding need to honor her. The headstone, polished and permanent, carries her name, the dates of her birth and death, and a brief inscription that acknowledges the long years she spent without identity. The funeral service that Sherri never received in 1980 was, in a sense, conducted 4 decades later, with strangers standing in for the family that could not be there, bearing witness to a life that mattered. The Walker County Sheriff's Office, which had never formally closed the case, reaffirmed its commitment to finding her killer. The lead investigators, some of whom had inherited the file from retired mentors, spoke publicly about the rejuvenated sense of purpose that Sherri's identification had brought. The forensic genetic genealogy that gave Sherri back her name had not produced a suspect, but it had opened new avenues. Detectives began re-interviewing individuals who had been in the area in 1980, including former inmates of the Ellis unit who had since been released and were now senior citizens scattered across the country. Prison records were digitized and cross-referenced with other databases. The Ellis unit itself, still an active maximum security prison, cooperated fully, allowing investigators access to archival visitation logs, inmate correspondence, and employment rosters of guards and civilian staff from that era. The theory that Sherri was lured to the prison by someone she believed was a friend remains the central thread. The challenge is that many potential persons of interest from that time are now deceased, and those who are alive have memories fogged by the passage of more than 4 decades. Yet the sheriff's office has publicly stated that they are pursuing specific individuals whose names surfaced during the genealogy work and the subsequent background investigation into Sherri's last months. The family of Sherri Jarvis, though fragmented by time and circumstance, has had to navigate the complex terrain of public attention and private grief. Extended family members who barely knew Sherri, or who only knew of her through whispered stories, suddenly found themselves at the center of a true crime phenomenon. They have largely chosen to remain out of the spotlight, but their cooperation with law enforcement has been essential. DNA samples from multiple relatives were used not only to confirm the initial identification, but to build out the family tree that genealogists used to trace Sherri's lineage. That same family tree, now exhaustively mapped, may yet hold the key to the killer. If the perpetrator was a relative, however distant, the genetic web could ensnare him. Forensic genealogists at Othram have continued to analyze the degraded DNA profiles extracted from evidence items, searching for any trace of male DNA that might belong to the assailant. The technology known as whole genome sequencing has improved dramatically since the initial extraction, and scientists remain hopeful that even microscopic touch DNA left on Sherri's clothing or the ligature can be amplified and identified. The city of Huntsville itself carries a certain stoicism born of its unique identity as a town dominated by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The presence of multiple prison units, including the Ellis unit, which houses death row and once housed the state's execution chamber, means that the residents are no strangers to the darker aspects of human nature. Yet the murder of Sherri Jarvis pierced through that calloused exterior because she was a child, an outsider, and for so long, a nameless victim. Local historians and journalists have documented the case extensively, ensuring that new generations learn about the Halloween night that ended a young life. The Sam Houston State University campus, located in Huntsville, has hosted symposiums on cold case investigations and forensic science, often featuring Sherri's case as a prime example of how persistent effort and advanced technology can resolve even the most stubborn mysteries. The family of Sherri Jarvis has also had to grapple with the systemic failures that allowed her to vanish. The lack of communication between Minnesota and Texas authorities in 1980, the dismissive treatment of a runaway by a juvenile system that lacked the resources to truly protect her, and the decades-long failure to match her missing person profile with her unidentified remains all represent institutional breakdowns. In the wake of the identification, advocacy groups for missing and exploited children have highlighted Sherri's case as a call to action. Law enforcement agencies across the country have reviewed their own cold case protocols, and the importance of promptly entering missing children into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, or NamUs, is stressed more than ever. Sherri's mother, in her few public statements, has expressed the wish that no other parent should endure the purgatory of uncertainty that she endured. The ripple effects of the identification have extended to other families in Walker County and beyond. The success of genetic genealogy in naming Sherri prompted the Texas Attorney General's cold case and missing persons unit to partner with OFRAM and other private laboratories to examine dozens of other unidentified remains cases. Several identifications have since been made, each one a testament to the legacy of the work that began, in part, with the determination to identify a 14-year-old girl dumped on a lonely road. Sherri's case file, now thicker than ever with new investigative reports, DNA analysis summaries, and genealogical charts, sits in the Walker County Sheriff's Office not as a closed book, but as a living document. Detectives continue to field tips from the public. A reward, funded by private donations and supplemented by Crime Stoppers, remains in place for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. The amount is substantial enough to incentivize those who might be hesitant, but the true motivation for most callers is a sense of moral duty, a desire to bring peace to a child who was brutally discarded. The emotional toll on the community has been matched by a quiet resilience. Annual remembrance events are held at Oakwood Cemetery on the anniversary of Sherri's body being found, with candles lit and her name read aloud. Members of the volunteer organization Texas EquiSearch, which assists in searches for missing persons, have attended these vigils, standing in solidarity with a child they never had the chance to search for alive. The act of remembering has become a communal ritual, a way of telling Sherri, wherever she may be, that she is not alone. The families of other victims of unsolved homicides in the area have drawn strength from the developments in Sherri's case. They have seen that the passage of time does not have to be an enemy of justice, that science and tenacity can converge to produce answers even after hope seems lost. This solidarity has turned Huntsville into a reluctant but determined hub of cold case activism, a place where the unsolved are not forgotten, but are instead held close by a community that understands that every name matters. The waitress who served Sherri at the Hitchin Post truck stop is likely now deceased, but her family has spoken of how the memory of the polite, sad-eyed girl stayed with her for the rest of her life. The truck driver who gave Sherri the ride to the prison gate has also passed away, but his account, preserved in the original case file, remains a critical piece of the timeline. These ordinary people, who intersected with Sherri in her final hours, became unwitting witnesses to a tragedy, and their lives were marked by it. Their descendants now know that their parents and grandparents tried to help a child in need, even if their help was not enough to save her. Sherri's mother, living quietly in Minnesota, now has a photograph of the headstone in Huntsville framed in her home. She has visited the grave once, a pilgrimage made possible by donations from strangers who were moved by the story. At the grave, she left a letter, its contents private, and a small plush bear, a symbol of the childhood Sherri was robbed of. She has spoken of a strange comfort in finally being able to say goodbye, a ritual denied to her for so long. The pain has not vanished, but it has been given a shape and a name, and that shape can now be laid to rest. The investigation, however, knows no rest. The Walker County Sheriff's Office remains convinced that the killer can be identified. They have narrowed the pool of possible suspects through genealogical triangulation, and they continue to work with the Texas Rangers and the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to build a profile of the unknown offender. They are optimistic that a breakthrough may come from the very same science that identified Sherri, as methods for isolating perpetrator DNA from mixed or compromised samples continue to improve. Every few months, a new press release reminds the public that the case is active, and a dedicated tip line remains open. The phrase, Sherri Jarvis, "We have not forgotten you," echoes through the halls of the sheriff's office, a mantra that has been repeated by 4 successive sheriffs, each one determined that the case would not be left for the next administration to solve, but would be solved on their watch. The final resolution, when it comes, will be a moment of reckoning for a town that has carried this weight for so long. Until then, Huntsville holds Sherri's memory in trust, a trust that is renewed each time a child is found safe, each time a missing person is identified, each time a cold case is solved. The story of Sherri Jarvis is a wound that is not fully healed, but it is a wound that is kept clean, examined, and treated with the medicine of relentless pursuit. She came to Texas seeking something that was denied her in life, and in death, she has found a home in the hearts of a community that refuses to let her fade. Her name is spoken now, her face is seen, and her case remains open. A testament to the enduring belief that even the most forgotten among us can be reclaimed, and that justice, however delayed, is worth every ounce of effort it demands. If you found value in this story, please consider hitting subscribe and leaving a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next real cold case investigation. We truly appreciate your support. Thanks for listening and watching.